This is Caring for Kids on News Talk 760 WJR, presented by the Children's Hospital of Michigan Foundation. And here's your host, President and CEO of the Children's Hospital of Michigan Foundation, Larry Burns.
Thanks, Mark. Hello, and welcome to Caring for Kids, where we discuss a variety of issues concerning the health and wellness of children locally, regionally, and nationally. And I'm your host, Larry Burns, President and CEO of the Children's Hospital of Michigan Foundation. Tonight, we have Eric Hipple, former Detroit Lions quarterback and author of the book Real Men Do Cry, and an advocate for mental health initiatives. Kari Walker is President and CEO of the Guidance Center. He's going to come in. And Dr. Michael Klein, pediatric surgeon of the Children's Hospital of Michigan. It's all coming up next right here on Caring for Kids on the great voice of the Great Lakes, News Talk 760 WJR.
It's Caring for Kids with Larry Burns.
Eric Hipple, born in Lubbock, Texas, attended Utah State, where he received his Bachelor of Science in Business Administration, while, of course, playing quarterback for the university's football team. Eric then translated those skills to the NFL, playing 10 seasons right here in Detroit, in the Motor City, for our Detroit Lions. Since the end of his NFL career, Eric has written a book called Real Men Do Cry, and has devoted himself to building awareness and breaking down the stigmas associated with depressive illnesses. Eric spent 11 years with the University of Michigan Comprehensive Depression Center, and in 2015 received the prestigious U of M Neubacher Award for his advocacy efforts in mental health. Eric Hipple, welcome to Caring for Kids.
Thank you for having me. I really appreciate it. Thank you.
And still in Detroit, you're a favorite, so I know our listeners are glad to hear that you're doing well and are anxious to hear about what we're going to talk about. So, you know, most people know you from your quarterbacking days with the Lions. But since then, you've done a lot of important things, particularly in the advocacy for mental health. Can you tell our listeners a little bit about that pathway?
Detroit Lions had their season ticket holders come down for an event the other day to meet the coach and stuff, and they had a couple of us alumni. And I was sitting next to Greg Landry, doing some autographs and whatnot. And the people that came through, just to show you how things change, over time. Many of them great fans saying, "Hey, enjoyed watching you play." But about half the people that came through there actually made comments about what I do today.
That's great.
And I thought that was fantastic.
Yeah,
and they're really happy that we're taking the lid off on some of this talk about mental health and getting down to it. So what I'm doing today is I do a school program that's in Michigan where we handle about 15 schools a year, and then some peer-to-peer work within that school as well. I also am at Eisenhower Center, which is a neurocognitive behavioral center where we treat veterans and former athletes.
Good. So you were talking a little bit about what you're doing now, and I want to talk to you a little bit about the book that you wrote, Real Men Do Cry. And for those listeners who haven't read that, can you kind of summarize that book, what led you to write that, and what it's all about?
The book is really about what happens in grief and loss, and it can actually affect us. Men particularly try not to show tears, and that means in the workplace or out in public. If they're really hurting, they try not to shed tears. And the problem with that is that means they're trying not to shed tears anywhere, and that means they start avoiding things and start trying to isolate because they don't want to have this emotional side come out. And so it was about that. It was about that it is okay. There are times when we really need to. In fact, it's a healthy thing to do. And it was a response to that. So we can try and stay on this mental health path of what is fit and what's not fit. And some of that means that, sometimes we're emotional beings, and sometimes we need to go there.
Exactly. So we're talking with Eric Hipple, former Detroit Lion and now author and advocate for mental health issues. And I know you spent some time at the University of Michigan at the Depressive Center, and some of us have heard of that, but can you tell us a little bit more about what your role was and a little bit more about that center?
Sure, and for me, it's been somewhat life-saving. After my son died, I went through a really bad downhill spiral a lot of self-medicating, but also just depression, grief, isolation, self-destructive behaviors. And it was actually when that changed, that moment of time when you say, okay, this has got to stop, and said, I want answers. What is it that happened to my son? What is it that was going on with me? I want some answers. And so I was fortunate enough to have an opportunity to attend the University of Michigan Depression Center on a lunch and learn. And that information grew into a position there as an outreach specialist and coordinator, and started putting together programs and doing outreach to hard-to-reach populations and stigmatized populations like law enforcement, like military, like professional athletes, like executives, pretty much men in general, really, and kids, and youth. And that's where I focused in on. But the University of Michigan Depression Center is like no other. It's the first of its kind. There's like 23 other centers across the country now, but it was the first of its kind. And they actually called it Depression Center so they could actually, take on stigma. But it's housed in psychiatry over at the University of Michigan. And its goal is to do the outreach and promote research, but also promote, anti-stigma campaigns and trying to get people to treatment.
Good. Well, and I mentioned offline that our foundation now has a focus area on mental health. And for youngsters, we are funding a study that's going on right now in 12 universities across the state on suicide prevention in those universities. So that's a 3-year study along with the JED Foundation, the Blue Cross Blue Shield Foundation of Michigan, and a few other foundations, the Flynn Foundation locally. And then we're also getting involved in early education, in early detection of youngsters that have mental health and behavioral issues caused by the traumatic things that happen in their lives. And so have you seen maybe a reinforcement of trying to help children with mental health issues versus just adults?
Well, yeah, because this young generation that we have, they're more open. They talk. Maybe it's because of the social media influence, but they talk. They're not afraid of talking about mental health at all. The problem is, how do we get them the resources, and how do we further along, that journey? And it's much different than talking to adults, because adults still have to carry around that stigma. When you talk about mental health, they assume we're talking about something bad, as opposed to just the opposite, which is mental health is something that's good. And I think the language, not changing the language, but understanding the language a little bit better. So when we talk about mental health, what we want is we want somebody to have that sense of well-being on who they are, and so they can be productive. They can also handle stresses and be more resilient, but they have a sense of community. But it's about it's about being that sense of well-being about who you are, being comfortable with who you are, and feeling that way. And that could be somebody that has a brain illness. It could be somebody that has bipolar illness. It could be somebody that's got depression. They can still be mentally healthy because they're doing what they need to do to take care of themselves. And I think that's the picture we want to push. It's not just, uncoupling it from the mental illness side of it and said, well, that's that. But if I'm talking about mental health, then we have to leave that alone and talk about, people that are healthy. It's not. People that do have brain illnesses can be very healthy. In the same token, somebody who doesn't have a brain illness can be unhealthy as well because of their lack of self-esteem, the trouble they might be going through, or how they view themselves, or how their relationships are with others, their spirituality, and all this stuff can be, if it's not a whole person, can be unhealthy.
Yeah, and that may be in some ways maybe even more frightening, because they appear to be just fine and they really aren't.
Yeah, there was a nice event that University of Michigan had about a week ago. Who can relate? And in that panel discussion, it came up about connection is really important. We want to be connected. We want to share with each other and stuff, and we want to support each other. But there is a little caveat that goes along with that. That means we want to also have healthy people, okay, regardless if they have brain illness or not, but being involved in that discussion, because we want healthy people helping other people. If you just have a group of people and they're all unhealthy, right? And the way that they think and the way that they behave and their destructive behaviors, you're going to have a bunch of more unhealthy people, because you just have this codependent relationship going on all over the place. And so we want to describe what mental health is, that sense of well-being and who you are.
Great. So one final question. We're talking with Eric Hipple from the Detroit Lions, and now mental health advocate. Is Some say that sports is a metaphor for life, and can you share with our listeners a little bit of some of the lessons you learned, not only from your NFL days, but also your collegiate days as an athlete?
Yes, it is. Football is a team sport, and that in itself, signifies that we're in this life together, as a team, with a common goal of getting through it and a mission. But it's about, like any team, it's not just a bunch of people put together. It's actually individuals, okay, that are taking care of themselves and making sure they do their job first, and then have the abundance to reach over to the next person and pull them up, lift them up when he gets knocked down, because I'm up. If I get knocked down, you can lift me up. But the idea is to get everybody standing, and to win, and be successful. And so to have that common mission and work together. And I think this is the way how it is in life. I mean, we get knocked down, and somebody who's standing can reach down and pick us up. We could be there for somebody else. And the fact you get in a huddle and guys reach over and grab hands and hold hands and say, we're in this thing together. And so there's a lot of adversity that happens on the field, and there's a lot of adversity that happens in life. And the idea is not just to survive it; it's to survive and it's to thrive. And so how do we do this in a positive way? A lot of it has to do with information. That means I need to know what's out there. I need to know what the defense is going to do so I can be prepared to have a great game plan. And so in life, we also have to have a great game plan. And that means being aware and educating ourselves on what's out there.
Great. Well, it certainly makes perfect sense to me. And I want to thank you for being on Caring for Kids, and thank you for staying connected in the Michigan area and what you're doing for mental health advocacy.
I love it. Thank you very much.
Appreciate it. Yep, we'll stay in touch. That's Eric Hipple, former Detroit Lion quarterback and current mental health advocate. So coming up next, we're going to have Kari Walker. Kari is the president and CEO of the Guidance Center when Caring for Kids continues here on the great voice of the Great Lakes, News Talk 760 WJR.
Welcome back to Caring for Kids on WJR, presented by the Children's Hospital of Michigan Foundation.
Kari Walker is in the studio, and Kari was named the president and CEO of the Guidance Center in 2010, serving as only the third president and CEO in the agency's 60-year history, which really indicates stability there. Prior to his current appointment, Kari was the chief operating officer of the Guidance Center for 14 years and has served on the agency's leadership team since 1996. Kari has his Master's of Social Work from the University of Michigan School of Social Work and is a member of the Washtenaw County Community Mental Health Board. Kari, welcome to Caring for Kids.
Thank you, Larry. Appreciate being able to be here.
Well, it's great to see you, and you were one of the first people I met when I took this new job a year or so ago, and one of the first tours I had was the Guidance Center. And it's one of our most important partnerships that we have. And so I wanted to give you an opportunity not only talk a little bit about that later, but to talk a little bit about the Guidance Center. And for our listeners that want to know more about it, tell us a little bit about that.
Okay. Well, the Guidance Center has been around for 60 years. We were formed in 1958. A group of local citizens that were concerned about the lack of mental health resources got together. Actually, it took them about 4 years to organize the Guidance Center and launch.
Mm-hmm. Was it always called the Guidance Center?
No, originally it was the Downriver Child Guidance Clinic.
Okay. Gotcha.
And started as primarily a child-oriented organization that still is our center of gravity today, but we've evolved over the years and have a full array of early childhood education, prevention, treatment, and outreach programs. We're working with adults and children. Again, still primarily focused on children. About 85% of our funded programs are focused on children. We served last year over 22,000 people in our various programs. And over the 60 years, we estimate that we've served over 500,000 people in Southeast.
Their families, impacting people and their families.
Yes.
And so as the 8th year as CEO of the Guidance Center, we're talking with Kari Walker. Talk about some of the things over those 8 years that have either changed or that you feel you've had the greatest impact. I know technology has changed things. I don't know if it's impacted you and your organization, but what do you think about when you look back at those 8 years?
Well, first of all, I see my position as one of it's a privilege. It's a privilege to be a leader of an organization like the Guidance Center. I don't take it for granted. I felt that way from day one. While I had been at the agency a long time, during the transition to a new CEO, it wasn't guaranteed that I would necessarily be that person. Right. So I appreciate the fact that the board thought enough to give me the opportunity. So the one thing I've realized is that it's hard to be really effective if you don't have a good board as a nonprofit.
Right, sure.
And Guidance Center's got a very involved board. They commit their time, their talent, their money to the mission and what we do. The other thing, just in terms of, a lot of what we do is soft skills oriented. So while tech is important, and of course we've seen the advent of electronic medical records and telepsychiatry and things of that sort, it still comes back to the soft skills are important.
The interaction with people.
Yeah. And I've felt personally that, when I meet with new employees, I emphasize to them that the values that we want to communicate as an organization are being welcoming and accessible. We want to treat people with dignity and respect. We work with a lot of people who are vulnerable and sometimes down on their luck. They shouldn't be treated like that.
Yeah, absolutely.
So a little kindness can go a long way.
It sure can. And so the Guidance Center, under your leadership, has recently completed a major gift campaign to help build a permanent home for the Guidance Center's Kids Talk program in Midtown Detroit. And can you share with our listeners a little bit about that campaign and what the campaign is going to allow you to do?
Sure. So Kids Talk stands for Kids Talking and Listening to Kids. Is a children's advocacy center that we were invited to manage about 15 years ago. It was started by the prosecutor's office, but they were interested in having an independent organization take it over. And the Guidance Center was selected to do that. And our challenge was to find ways to get the program funded. So we've worked over the years to evolve the Kids Talk program. It started really small. We had about $300,000 in funding when we originally started. It has over a $2.1 million budget now.
Wow. Great growth.
Yep. And, it's doing an important service. We do forensic interviews whenever there's an allegation of child sexual abuse, as you know. And then we also have a medical clinic that we're grateful that the Children's Hospital of Michigan Foundation has funded. So we have a child abuse doctor who is able to do forensic medical exams. And then we also have a group of therapists that specialize in trauma and work with many of the kids. Last year, we saw over 2,000 kids through the Kids Talk program.
Yeah. The number's alarming, just because there's so many, but we are so thankful that you are there doing this. And I mentioned, and then you brought up a couple minutes ago about our partnership with the Children's Hospital Michigan Foundation. And April is National Child Abuse Prevention Month. And last year and moving forward, the foundation has provided grant funding for Kids Talk, for specific parts of Kids Talk that we look to support. And can you talk a little bit about that, of what our grant actually funds, so people get a sense of what we do to help you?
Yes. Well, I mentioned the medical clinic, and it's oftentimes when kids disclose, it's well after the sexual abuse has happened, and the medical exam can be very subtle in terms of developing findings that might be useful. But the important thing about a medical exam for a child in this situation is that it's reassuring to the child that there's nothing wrong with them. And that can go a long way towards helping kids heal and recover. And that's the whole point of the Kids Talk program, is it's a program of healing. Bad things happen in life, but they don't have to. It doesn't have to take people down or or cause a whole sequela of other problems to develop.
Right. So
the funding that the foundation has provided has helped us in our therapy program in those children that have mild to moderate symptoms in terms of the trauma.
Mm-hmm.
We think every child that goes through an experience like this should be eligible for counseling, but a lot of the funding sources that we work with are designed to treat people with more serious conditions. So the Guidance Center has been a provider for community mental health, and of course the criteria for community mental health services is serious emotional disturbance. Not all the kids who come through the Kids Talk program meet that criteria. So your funding has helped us work with of the 2,381 children that come through the program have been able to get counseling services, as part of the follow-up care after an interview.
Yeah, well, that's exactly what our foundation is evolving into. Is it not only a child advocacy organization, and in this case, a child mental health advocate, but also to make sure that we're providing funding for programs where kids, unfortunately, and their families sometimes would fall through the cracks.
Right.
Because of the, in my opinion, personal opinion, the inappropriate and lack of funding for mental health overall. And so we're dedicated and committed to continuing to do that. And so this partnership we're so very proud of. And so our listeners also want to know where you see the Guidance Center going in the next 2, 3, 5 years. What do you see as your goals?
Well, I think that we've had great success with partnerships with other nonprofits over the years. The Guidance Center has been, I think, innovative in working with other organizations. I see that in our future. This past year, we got together with 17 other mental health centers in the Detroit area and formed an association called the My Health and Wellness Collaborative. That's going to be really important, I think, in the future. A lot of funders want to see organizations merge, but to say many organizations here in the Detroit area are very neighborhood-based, grassroots-based. Yeah, we can work together in other ways rather than just merging. So we're exploring that now.
Yeah, and we want to be a facilitator of that as well. So if there's anything we can do and moving forward at the foundation to help facilitate that, either sponsor a meeting, hold meetings, facilitate meetings, and that's a role we want to have as well. Okay. We're unique in the sense that we are granting money. We are the state's largest children's dedicated funder, meaning we only support children's programs. And that we're also trying to grow financially and with partnerships in that. So our advocacy role is something we take very serious with our partners. And you being a long-standing partner, please use us in any way that we can to help you and your colleagues across the city, the region, the state, and the country.
Certainly will. I guess one other thing I wanted to share is just that, as I mentioned, this is our 60th year of being in operation, and as such, we're having a big gala celebration at the end of September 22nd. Folks could learn more about it by visiting our website.
All right. And we'll put that on our Caring for Kids website. Okay. September 22nd. All right. Where's it going to be at?
The Henry Autograph Collection.
The Henry. Awesome. I went to your gala last year.
Yes.
And it was awesome. I enjoyed it, and it was a lot of fun. This will even be bigger and better.
Yes.
Celebrating a big anniversary. So, Kari Walker, thank you for what you do, for what the Guidance Center does. We look forward to continuing our partnership. And so taking care of kids is what we want to do.
Thank you, Larry.
Appreciate it. Coming up next, speaking of taking care of kids, we're going to hear from pediatric surgeon Dr. Michael Klein. When Caring for Kids continues here on the great voice of the Great Lakes, News Talk 760 WJR.
Welcome back to Caring for Kids on WJR. Presented by the Children's Hospital of Michigan Foundation. Once again, here's Larry Burns.
Dr. Michael Klein is a pediatric surgeon, currently acting as the interim chief of pediatric ear, nose, and throat, ENT, at our Children's Hospital of Michigan. Dr. Klein received his bachelor's degrees from the University of Denver, University of Chicago, and Case Western University, while obtaining his graduate degrees at Princeton University and Case Western University. All very impressive. He is the chair of the Section Forum Management Committee at the American Academy of Pediatricians and does mission work with both Kenya Relief and Doctors Without Borders. Dr. Klein serves on our Grants and Compliance Committee, thank goodness, for the foundation, and he has endowed a fund in honor of his late wife, Peggy Klein, and that is known as the Peggy Klein Staff Nurse Education Endowment. And my personal opinion, since I was at Children's Hospital from 1987 to 1990, we are in the presence of a legend here. So, Dr. Klein, welcome to Caring for Kids.
Thank you very much. It's a pleasure to be here.
We're just delighted that you have time. He mentioned that he came in from Washington this morning and then went to the dentist. So thank you for making time. So your career has been and is outstanding. And so as a pediatric surgeon, a lot of people don't know what that really means. And so can you explain what your career path has been?
Yeah, it's a very interesting field. When I started in the 1970s, it was a very unusual specialty, and we took care of very special problems, usually in small babies and in children with tumors. And we did very little routine surgery, which was done by surgeons caring for adults. Over the past 40 years, though, that has changed remarkably, where pediatric surgeons now care for most of the problems in children under 18. There are very few general surgeons, even in this community any longer, who do what we call routine procedures such as hernia repair or appendectomy. They usually can find a pediatric surgeon now to do that.
And so, like, I had a hernia operation when I was probably 10, and that was done by a general surgeon.
Right, and nowadays that would be very unusual, and it's an interesting phenomenon. One of the problems is there's actually a shortage of general surgeons. Most people are specializing,
right,
and so there are fewer general surgeons now who are comfortable taking care of children.
Absolutely. And so when did you realize that you wanted to be not only a physician but a pediatrician and a pediatric surgeon? Was that early on in your life, your career?
That was not early on in my life. I started off as a graduate student in medieval history. That's
Really?
why I went to Princeton.
Okay.
And then it was during the Vietnam War, and I had a relevance crisis. Like, what I was doing didn't seem to be all that terribly important, although it was a lot of fun. So I went to medical school. That was another story, but in medical school, there was a pediatric surgeon in Cleveland, Bob Izant, who was very impressive. And it just kind of developed from there. I did my residency in Boston and had the opportunity to spend 2 years at the Children's Hospital there, and then I was just convinced that's what I wanted to do.
And how did you end up in Detroit?
It's a very interesting story. I almost didn't. When I was looking for pediatric
We're glad you did.
I was looking for pediatric surgery fellowships, and I was interviewing actually at the Mayo Clinic, and I had gotten this letter and said, okay, well, I'll stop in Detroit on my way back to Boston. And when I visited the Children's Hospital here, I can just say that I was remarkably impressed that the facilities were so much better than we were using in Boston.
Yeah.
I hope I could say this anymore, but that's when I realized that there was a world west of the Hudson.
Yes, indeed. And you stayed, so you must have liked that world.
Oh, no, it's been absolutely remarkable. I spent 1 year in New Mexico after my fellowship, and I was at the University of Michigan for 3 years. But I was delighted when I was able to come back here in 1983 It's a remarkable place to work and practice.
Yes,
I've enjoyed it immensely.
And I certainly found that to be the case during my Caring for Kids campaign days from 87 to 1990. And I worked with you, Paul Broughton, who I loved working with, and Arvin Philippart. And
the two other refugees from Boston, Paul Broughton and Arvin Philippart.
Right, yeah. So it was a great time. And then I went off to Ohio for a while, but I came back, so I'm where I belong. And so I want to talk a little bit about the endowed fund that you created in honor of your wife, Peggy Klein, that goes towards supporting staff nursing education. And tell our listeners a little bit about Peggy, if you don't mind, and about the endowment.
Oh, no. I met Peggy. Peggy was a nurse on the burn unit at Children's. I mean, our family has Children's Hospital of Michigan blood. Peggy was a patient at Children's as a child. When it was her first job out of nursing school. She was there before I was, and she was a nurse on the burn unit, which is where I met her and worked at Children's for 30 or 40 years.
Right.
She always wanted to be a staff nurse. When we traveled elsewhere, she was, like in New Mexico and Michigan, she was offered head nurse jobs. But she never really wanted to do anything but care for patients. And the endowment is set up with that funny name because we wanted to be sure that it was for staff nurses who normally didn't have funds for educational conferences. And we didn't want, as much as I love them, we didn't want it used by specialist nurses, head nurses, or administrators.
Yeah, right. Makes perfect sense. And so it's our responsibility to make sure that those wishes are carried out. And you have my commitment that will continue to be the case. We're talking with Dr. Michael Klein, pediatric surgeon and long-standing leader at Children's Hospital of Michigan. And you're also now doing mission work. You and I chatted a little bit about that before, and I'm very familiar with Doctors Without Borders. And can you talk about that and your Kenya Relief?
Yes, well, Kenya Relief is a very interesting program which was started by a nurse anesthetist about 20 years ago in memory of his daughter. They began with a small outpatient clinic, school, and orphanage, and it's just ballooned. They now have just finished building a hospital, and they about 15 times a year, medical teams will go there, and for a week we do surgery and see patients. It's very efficient, very well run, and we can get a lot accomplished. It's in the city called Magori, which no one has heard of, but it's a city of 2 million people with very little medical care.
And so, and then the Borders Initiative, is that similar?
Yeah, well, Doctors Without Borders is a totally different and remarkable organization that goes to places where it's needed most. It is totally financed by private donations. They take nothing from governments or larger associations because in order to go to the places they go to, they have to be politically 100% neutral. And it's a larger commitment. The only surgeons and anesthesiologists are allowed to stay for as short a time as 6 weeks. Everybody else has to go for a year.
Okay, wow.
But it's composed of, most of the people who go are actually administrators and human resources people because most of the people they employ are local people whom they then pay and support.
Gotcha. So one question I wanted to ask you that for parents, grandparents that are listening to this show that may not know, what makes Children's Hospital of Michigan and a children's hospital special versus other places?
Well, the special thing is the depth of the experience that can be applied. There are many specialties which might be done elsewhere but are not done in the same way. For instance, pediatric anesthesia and pediatric radiology specialists in those areas aren't always available at general hospitals. I think even more important is the nursing and the child and family-centered atmosphere that they're able to convey makes the whole experience significantly better.
One of the things I always used to say is these are not little adults.
They're not, from a medical point of view, most of the time their problems are very different, and they're problems that people who care for adults generally just aren't familiar with.
Right, good. So thank you for explaining that. So last question. I know you're a great cycler. You helped the foundation out by buying a Shinola bike at our event, and then you rode it home.
It was very cold that day. This weather, spring has to come soon.
Yes, indeed, it will. And then I also heard that you enjoy translating Latin poetry.
Well, that's actually true. That's left over from my days in medieval history, and that's my retirement hobby. I don't play golf, I don't sail, but I'd like to spend time in libraries.
Awesome. Well, and I know a little bit of Latin just because of my early Catholic education, but I can't translate anything. So, Dr. Klein, thank you on behalf of the patients that you've served and the families in the hospital, and for all you do and that you've done. And so, thanks for helping us on our committee. We need you, so thank you.
Thank you very much. Thank you for what you're doing with the foundation. We appreciate it.
Thank you. Well, it's a team effort, and as you mentioned earlier, I'm also honored to serve the foundation, so thank you very much. So stay tuned. We'll be right back. I'm going to review some cool things going on at the foundation when we return to Caring for Kids. Welcome back, everybody. Larry Burns here for Caring for Kids. That was a great show. Dr. Michael Klein is awesome, just a legend. And I know there's listeners out there that he has operated on you, your children or your grandchildren, so he's doing great. So we have a couple cool events coming up. On April 28th, we have a concert at the City Theater with Alexander Zonchek and friends Alex Bugnon and Javier Colin. And that is a fundraiser for our foundation. That'll be great. You can go to our website for tickets. They're only $40. There's VIP tickets, too, as well, but it'll be a great value. And then the following Saturday, on Saturday, May 5th, we have our second annual Derby for Kids at the Fabulous Country Club of Detroit. Tickets are $150. There's food, entertainment, beverages, margaritas, and, of course, we have mint juleps, bow ties, dresses, hats, the whole thing. So that is going to raise money for pediatric cancer programs at Children's Hospital. So hopefully you can make one or both of those. Thanks for joining us tonight on Caring for Kids. Please join us next time and appreciate all of your support. Indeed.
Caring for Kids on WJR has been presented by the Children's Hospital of Michigan Foundation.